keep going.
And you got a right to be wrong. You got a right to be right. It sounds like to you, but it doesn't sound like that to a whole host of others at all, though, brother. Not
okay.
At all.
All right. Again, I'm saying this out of love for you because I do have deep love for you. I have deep respect for you. And we agree on almost everything except the message of your campaign, right? That's the only thing. I would hope it would become even more focal. Let me just put it this way.
But are you suggesting that the message should be that Biden is a greater fascist than Trump? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that you should talk about fascism or any of that stuff. I think you should.
No, fascism is very real. I think you think fascism is real in the country?
We're living in it. We're living in fascism.
But I'm talking about escalating in terms of intensity.
It has since Biden became president. It certainly has escalated in intensity. They've censored everybody. They've crushed unions. They've started another war, and now they're saber rattling with 2 nuclear powers. I don't know how worse it could get. And by the way, he still hasn't let people out of prison. He still hasn't given student loan. He's still denying us health care. He's an enemy of the worker and a tool of military-industrial complex in Wall Street. There's no bigger fascist in the country than Joe Biden. The reason why black and brown people are locked up again isn't because of Trump. It's because of brother Biden. And Joe Biden is proud of that. He brags about that. He brags about the crime bill, and he will never apologize for it. So I'm just letting you know that I really want your campaign to pick up traction. This is the opposite way to do it. Who's ever advising you sounds like an infiltrator.
But why do you keep saying advising? I'm thinking for myself, brother. I'm a free
I don't mean to insult you.
That's not just question of advising.
Okay.
I don't know who's advising you. You think
I think that might have been the moment where Jimmy realized that telling someone that the way that they're acting and speaking and participating in discourse is a result of someone advising them is not the brightest thing to do, and that it's kind of condescending, because he's like, okay, yeah, you're right.
Right. And Jimmy's show, we know it as producers, and like he had that controversy where one of his producers put some like anti-vax story in the show that ended up being a hoax or being not true. So yeah, I mean, you can make that criticism about everyone. We all rely on other people to help us, inform our opinions and put stuff together. But I get the point that Jimmy's making, and I made the same thing. I think Cornel maybe does listen a little bit too much to these really loud voices on the left to shame people for taking the, wrong opinion. But yeah, it's not a great way to go about having discourse, saying that's not your opinion. You're being told that by Democratic staffers.
Right. And it's, I know Jenny here mentions that it wasn't racist or insulting when it happened with Bernie, but it's a whole different party. It's a whole different dynamic. That's how the Democratic Party runs. They got a bunch of staffers that, and you saw that difference from like a 2016 Bernie to a 2020 Bernie, when a lot of the more woke Democratic advisors got into the campaign. And that's a fair criticism. But I don't know if it is here with the Green Party and Cornel. Maybe it is, and maybe I'm not as informed as to the inner workings of the Green Party. But I'm just saying, as a neutral observer, which I'm not, but I imagine someone as a neutral observer, that wouldn't be the sort of thing that sounds very good. It always sounds condescending, and it kind of makes you. It could, in some people's heads, make you sound like a dick, and I don't think that's what Jimmy Dore is trying to do.
You're a free man too, aren't you?
You're right. You're right. Okay, I was trying to put it in a nice way.
I use that kind of language, my brother. You want to be respectful.
I'm trying to be respectful. That was my.
I appreciate it. Okay. I know it looks like hard sometimes, but I appreciate it. But we just have disagreements on these things.
Again,
if I undermine the campaign for you, then you're free to have your own view and vision.
Okay.
And people are free to listen to you and be persuaded or not. And
okay.
I've got mine. I'm listening for your insight. Absolutely right. No doubt about that.
So let me just say this. So the point of running a third-party campaign is to offer an alternative to the two major parties, to bring together disaffected members of those parties, along with independents and others who feel alienated from the political system as it exists. And the best way to do this is by running on economic issues that unite us, but which neither major party is willing to address because they're both beholden to the same powerful corporate interests. The Democratic Party long ago abandoned the working class in favor of beating the drum on cultural issues, and now that's all the Democrats have to run on. So if voters are looking for a party running on trans rights and calling Donald Trump and his supporters white supremacists, they can already vote for Democrats.
There's also a really good video of Cornel West giving a lecture where he says, and he uses it in the sense that it used to be used, and in some sectors it's still used like that, where woke just means like awakened, enlightened to like social injustices or something. But he says if you stay woke too long, you get insomnia. And it was a really good criticism of how, some people take it to extremes that are very destructive, preventing potential movement, even in those areas where they're doing work in their heads for. Um, so let's see what he says. But do you have any comments before I play it, Eddie?
No, you can go ahead.
Democrats. The role of a third party is to focus not on the identity politics that divide us, but on core economic issues that unite us along class lines, like Christian Smalls did at Staten Island. Do you think he led with LGBTQ trans rights and white supremacy, or do you think he organized along class lines? That's what we have to do. You have to organize, meet people where they are. So what is your plan to organize along class lines, or are you going to keep talking about white supremacy and all those identity politics, which are there, not from the ground up, from the top down, to make sure we stay divided? What is your plan to organize along class lines?
Can I comment on this before he goes? Because this is one of the things where this part was clipped on the internet. Everyone and their mothers giving their opinion on it. And I haven't been very satisfied with a lot of the ones that I've seen. And in part, it's because everyone has been a little bit right, but one-sided in their analysis, in my view. And the thing is that it's the struggle against racism, the struggle against, the chattel slavery that black proletarians in the American South faced. And then the struggle against lynching after that, the lynching regime that really just takes off after the counter-revolution of 1876 and just terrorizes black people and white people that align with the struggle of the Black Freedom Movement. The struggle after that against Jim Crow and the culmination of that in the Third American Revolution, what's called the Civil Rights Movement. It's a civil rights revolution. It's a political revolution that radically transforms the country, removes the sort of apartheid state that we were in, and brings to full de jure citizenship a whole underclass of people, and in the process creates the conditions for the change in social consciousness that we've seen in the American people since. All of those things were not identity struggles. They were not simply race struggles. They were class struggles. They were struggles of working people against capital and against the poison of racism that capitalism uses in order to divide workers. Marx called this in his work on the Irish question, thinking specifically of the British workers and the Irish workers that had there was hostilities there, a lot of racism against the Irish. They were called in some places the N-words of Europe, the white N-words of Europe. He said that racism is the secret through which the ruling class, the capitalist, sustains its power. When you fight against that secret, against that thing which is keeping workers divided, that is a class struggle. That is a class struggle. So it's not like you either are fighting racism or you're fighting a working class struggle. That's the approach that the socialists of the 19th century, many of them had, and it was a failure. It was a complete failure. They weren't able to see that the biggest victory that labor ever won in this country was when, thanks to a general strike of the black proletarians in the South, a regime of slavery was uplifted, and those Southern planters were expropriated of more property than had been ever expropriated in the history of humanity up until that point. That was the biggest victory of labor, where 4 million people, working class people, were freed of the worst form of enslavement. And they didn't see it as, they saw it, it's just, and that's why Du Bois's category of not just thinking about the slave as a slave or a black slave, but thinking about them as a black proletarian, a black working class person, which is something that's already in Marx and enslaved proletariat. That is something that creates the conditions for seeing these struggles against racism as class struggles. And when you think about the last one, when you think about the Marxist theory of class struggle, the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles, plural. There's no such thing as a pure, very pretty, archetypical class struggle. They always take various determinate forms. Engels said in The Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State that the first class struggle history ever saw was that against patriarchy. It took the form of a struggle against sexism. Um, Marx writes it with regards to the Polish question and the Irish question. Lenin writes in terms of nations' struggle for national liberation and the struggles against imperialism. Those are, of course, class struggles. Those are not just national struggles. Those are forms of class struggle. And the same thing here in the U.S. with the struggle against racism. That has all been class struggles. However, the civil rights revolution has happened. People's minds have been changed in general at the level of judicature and at the level of laws. That underclass doesn't exist anymore. The left has this tendency of undermining the tremendous successes of the civil rights revolution and what it brought into the world. And in undermining that, it cannot understand our country today. But things like the Black Lives Matter movement. I was just talking recently with the Kiko's Free Thinker Forum. We reposted it a couple of days ago. Things like the Black Lives Matter movement. It doesn't matter whether there was activist NGOs involved. It doesn't matter that it just led to Biden being elected. What's important and revolutionary in that is that 25 million Americans, a lot of them white, went into the streets to protest a state that they felt had killed one of them, not just a random black guy. It killed one of them. And that's a process of a people becoming a people. That change in social consciousness is a result of the civil rights revolution and couldn't have happened. I mean, they fucking killed King, and you didn't get the 25 million people in the streets say you got with the Black Lives Matter movement. So it is true that conditions have changed. Conditions have changed, and today the ruling class primarily uses wokism to divide working people and get essentially some of the same results that it got back in the day. And it is true that today the conditions are more fertile than ever for a united working class struggle and for focusing on direct economic issues. Because in no part of the country, if you go to a white worker, it doesn't matter how many stereotypes they have about black people, will they ever say, I'm not going to organize with my coworker who's black because they are black. You will not get that in any part of the country, even the most racist parts, even in the parts that still have some lingering white supremacism. You won't get that. So it's a different time, but this is where both sides have been wrong. Yes, the struggle against racism is a class struggle, but the conditions have changed because of those class struggles which have been victorious. Today we have the best conditions we've ever had for fighting together as one people, and only in that fight is that lingering racism going to be overcome. In the same way that Du Bois said, the most advancements that we've had in overcoming racism have come thanks to the CIO, which was the basically communist formed union. It's been through struggling together that we've overcome racism, not just by looking at poor white people who oppressed black people have their lot with and saying, no, we condemn you, we cancel you, or whatever. So it's in the process of struggle that these lingering poisons of racism are going to be overcome. And I'm sorry for the rant, but I'm trying to be as comprehensive and concise at the same time as I can. But everyone that has been commenting on this has just been extremely one-sided. And, I may look back at this in a few years and think this is wrong, but this is, to my understanding, how the Marxist position in the U.S. rooted specifically in the analysis of Du Bois and some of the most prominent Marxists, Henry Winston. This is how the Marxist position would see this issue and criticize all of these different interpretations that we're seeing online.
Right. I don't think it's falling away from class struggle and moving towards identity politics just to bring up white supremacy or lingering effects of white supremacy historically, because it depends on how you go about combating that. Right? Do you talk about white supremacy so that you can maintain capitalism and just, slap a few BLM stickers on the planes that are going overseas to bomb black people and, call it a day and say that we've combated white supremacy now? We've all posted black squares on our Instagram, or are you going to the workplaces and organizing white, black, brown workers of every color, bringing them together to struggle against the ruling class? And then, as you said, also in the modern day, you have to call out the other side of the coin, wokism, which is just an effort to divide working people based on race or based on sexual orientation or based on whatever. So yeah, and maybe Cornel West does talk a little bit too much about identity politics from a strategic perspective, but ultimately we know that his position is organizing people based on class, but he calls out issues that are pertinent to Black Americans or Mexican Americans or immigrants. And there's nothing wrong with that. As Carlos said, that can take the form of class struggle, the struggle against that, institutional racism that exists. One world, one struggle. Hell yeah. Thank you so much for the Canadian super chat. Appreciate you, comrade.
And just real quick, because Jimmy hawks back at Chris Smalls, which if there is at all a vanguard forming within our working class, it's one that's being led by him. But do you think that his efforts organizing Staten Island, which is also called Trump Island, where the supposed most racist parts of the country are, do you think in that effort, where he had to unite with people and organize along the things that united them as people working within a specific shop floor with the same common ills and with the same enemy, do you think that the people that he organized that might have had some stereotypical negative views about Black people, do you think that in the process of fighting with Chris Smalls, those views didn't at least begin to be questioned or begin to change? That's the thing, and it's a paradox. That's the paradox. That's why being able to see contradictions in things is so important. Because at the same thing, racism, that prevents and fetters the class struggle, doesn't prevent, fetters the class struggle, can only be overcome through the class struggle. That's the paradox at play. That thing which limits the class struggle can simultaneously only be overcome through the class struggle, not through condemning, poor white people with prejudiced views. And I think that's something that, again, Chris Smalls is taking the lead on.
Absolutely. Fine Art Revolution, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. Well said, Carlos. Things are getting fluid, which gets strange and complicated, but also exciting. I just made a Cornel West design, so good timing on this video. Yeah, that looks awesome. Here's Fine Art Revolution's Cornel West design. I'll put the link in the chat if you guys want to go follow their Instagram or check out their design. This looks pretty sick. So we need more of that revolutionary art. Thanks, comrade.
And hit us up. We have an upcoming journal, and we always have art within the journal. So if you're interested in collaborating and having some of your artwork showcased in our journal, please do let us know. Let's keep it rolling. So Jimmy asked the questions, and now it's Cornel West reacting to Jimmy's question concerning the focusing on class and not white supremacy.
Well, I appreciate again the clarity and candor of what you have to say. We have profound disagreements, brother. When I organize around white supremacy, I'm not making some utilitarian calculation. I'm speaking as a Black man who comes out of a tradition that's been terrorized and traumatized by white elites. And that does not in any way mean it takes me away from class issues. Class issues are crucial. Class issues are fundamental.
I'm sorry to pause it so quick, but white elites. He's not condemning poor and working class white people like the people that use wokism to divide working people do. They want to blame it on poor white people. They want working class Black people to see their neighbors as their enemies at a time when it's clearer than ever that they're in the same struggle together. So again, you cannot compare Cornel's discourse to the one you get from like departments that focus on like race philosophy or something in the academy.
But it doesn't mean that I'm putting up with white supremacy. One of the problems is that you get too many folk who want to talk class, and can't say a mumbling word about white supremacy, police brutality, can't say a mumbling word hardly. Or when they do say it, you call it identity politics as if it's not connected to class. I'm hitting these head on. I'm standing with the workers when it comes to strikes. I'm standing with the workers when it comes to greedy bosses. I'm standing with the workers when it comes to obsession with profits and the needs not in any way being satisfied. But I'll never for a minute be silent or not raising my voice in terms of vicious treatment of Black people, indigenous people, gay brothers, lesbian sisters, or trans. It's not an either or. And that's where you and I have a deep profound disappointment. So if I see, for example, if I watch your show and I notice you hardly say a mumbling word about white supremacy because it's some kind of identity politics and I'm against it, but I don't want to talk about it. I only want to talk about what people hold in common. Well, black people are not going to hold it in common if you don't say a word about white supremacy, but maybe some of your white friends will. So who are you talking about? You're talking about in common. Are you talking about just a majority or what, my dear brother? I will never, ever in a million years not talk about vicious legacies of white supremacy, male supremacy, homophobia, transphobia, and others. But class will always be very much at the center. What brings you and I together is what? Our fundamental solidarity with working classes, not just here, but around the world. But oftentimes when I hear about your show and you say, well, you know, these identity politics issues get in the way. No, it's not getting in the way. They're not getting in the way.
100%. They're used by so the Democrats,
Well,
that's all they have to run on. And when you say that stuff, you just sound.
And I know we've been saying that Cornel West can think for himself and he's not influenced by anyone, but he did just let something slip there. He says, what I've been hearing about your show is this, that, and the other. I really do think he's got some leftists who really hate Jimmy Dore around him who are influencing him in that direction. I think that's hard to deny. And I think they probably convinced him to leave the People's Party, which Jimmy is connected to, which, as Marxist Saw pointed out earlier, is probably the real source of tension. And the real reason Jimmy Dore is much tougher on Cornel West than he was on RFK, because he feels like Cornel West abandoned the People's Party because of the reaction that he got from the left.
Which was an extremely, in some ways tactical because of ballot access, but he was one of the founders of the People's Party along with Jimmy. So it's like you found a party and then you go and you run through another one. That's just a little weird, but let's keep it rolling.
Like a Democrat, because that's all they have. So if
exactly
you
wrong.
need
if the talk about the dignity of black people in the face of vicious white supremacy makes me sound like a Democrat, you got the wrong earplug.
Okay,
you're not listening clearly, because if you can't hear the critique of Wall Street, if you can't hear the critique of militarism, if you can't hear the critique of the foreign policy in Ukraine, and all you can hear when they talk about white.
My question is, and this gets to what he previously was getting at, is who? Like who specifically, like what examples of people who are genuinely committed to the class struggle, to socialism, what examples are there of them saying to like the police killing of a black person, this doesn't matter or something like that? Like it kind of sounds a little bit like the academics accusation of people who want to have a class analysis as just de facto by doing that class reductionism, right? And it kind of opens the way to what Parenti called ABC theory, anything but class theory. That's not what Cornel West is doing. Of course, he's centering class, and in that way, he's way ahead of all of these people. But my question is, where are these folks who say they are with the class struggle, but then ignore when there's class struggles waged against poor black people or minorities? That's what I don't know. It seems like even the critique there, like when they ignore it, it's not that they ignore these other issues, but they ignore how these other issues are class issues. So they're not consistent enough in their class analysis. Would be the correct position. Not that, they ignore white, but they cling to be in favor of class analysis, but they're not. That's what the old racist unions, we're only going to organize white workers or something, which is a reality until like the middle of the last century. In the mainstream labor movement, you had, of course, the communists and the more militant unions. But when they do that, they're not organizing consistently along class lines. They might talk about that and say, no, that's black struggle is not mine. But when they have those divisions, they're not consistent in their class approach to struggle.
It's kind of funny criticizing both these guys, because every time I criticize Cornel, there's the same people in the chat who are like, no, that's wrong. And then every time I criticize Jimmy, it's the same people in the chat. No, that's wrong. Try not to like buy into the cult of personality. Try and be objective here, I guess, is what I would recommend to people.
Yeah, I was noticing that. I don't know. I've always heard the saying that it's good when both sides are criticizing you. But yeah, let's keep it rolling.
Supremacy is identity politics. Then something's wrong with your earplug, though, bro. Something's wrong with you. We just have deep disagreement with that. But
it's disappointing.
It is what it is. You are profoundly disappointing in that sense. But I still love you, brother.
I still love you too. I still love you too. I know you. I know you. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm talking about having a campaign. I'm not. There's a okay. So.
But the campaign is not about utilitarian calculation either. I don't look at black people like a utilitarian calculation. I can't say nothing because these people over here somehow are alienated. I'm telling the truth. I'm fighting for justice. And if people feel as if to talk about white supremacy is alienated, then they're going to be alienated. I'm talking about my mama. I'm talking about my daddy. This ain't no abstract dialogue about politics in the Machiavellian sense. Not at all,
so
my brother.
What Bernie caught.
We march together for class politics. We march together because that's real. But if you think that talking about white supremacy is just identity politics, we got deep disagreement. That's all. So I'm sorry to go on. And
no,
you're great kind to let me go.
No, go right ahead. No, go right ahead. I don't. And honest, everything I'm saying here, coming from my heart, I want your campaign to succeed, and I want you to have the strongest campaign possible. But Bernie caught on because he would always, if he was given a cultural question or an identity politics question, he would always bring it back to class and economics. And it doesn't. Well, here I was talking to one of Bernie's campaign managers, and this is what he said. Yes, I personally agree white supremacy is one of the causes. But if I lose two potential allies because they roll their eyes and stop listening.
That's another thing. I don't know who that friend is, but white supremacy is something epiphenomenal to the development of cap. That means that it's something that's produced out of the motives that guide the capitalist mode of life in the various stages that we've seen it through. In the original colonial stage, competitive stage, the imperialist, the neo-colonial. White supremacy is an add-on that capitalism in various stages has needed in order to achieve its objective and divide working people and create ideological legitimations for why it's okay to have some people in chains and not others. That doesn't make it a cause. That makes it the effect, something that's rooted in something else. Unless you're dealing very specifically with a specific event where you could say, okay, this is the cause of this in this particular event. But at the level of the system, it's not the cause. It's not the root cause of things. It's capitalism.
Which is why I like Jimmy's advice of if they throw culture war stuff at you, just tie it back to the class struggle every time. I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Before I get to their concerns, I've already lost. The civil rights advancements, women's rights, the environmental movement, they didn't happen because people like my dad voted Democrat because that stuff mattered to them. It happened because Democrats appealed to them on economic issues, and a lot of the Democrats they voted for because of economics also happened to vote for that other stuff. And it doesn't work in the inverse. So I'm just giving that to you.
No, I understand. You can see again how I disagree. Keep in mind, bro. Civil rights movement was not because of white folk doing X or Y. It was because it was a social movement led by black people in the South that was multiracial, but led primarily by black folk. And neither party would have done anything without that social movement.
100% right. You're 100% right. No doubt about it. And I think
that's my tradition. That's my tradition. How could you talk about?
No, I love to hear you talk about all that stuff, and that's good for a radical black activist who's representing his community. But I'm just trying to impress upon you that there's better ways to run a presidential campaign. And so that for a black radical activist, that's great. That's honey. But for someone who's trying to appeal to a wide swath of people, disaffected Republicans, independents, people, that's a death for that campaign. That's my opinion. That's just...
We'll have to see, but keep in mind, though, brother, that one, I've never ever said that all of the followers of Brother Trump are fascists. I said he's a neo-fascist Pied Piper. His followers, 1 out of 8 went with Bernie, 1 out of 12 went with Barack Obama. He's got a heterogeneous, diverse group. And I can speak my language of truth and justice as it connects to capitalism, imperialism, white supremacy, male supremacy, transphobia, whatever it is. And there's going to be some people who listen, and there's going to be some people who don't. But this is not just a question of political calculation and Machiavellian reflection, brother. This is about the quest for truth and justice. You got to be real. You got to be authentic. I'm not listening to consultants who tell me to use this particular kind of language with this group and this kind of language with that group. That is the essence of managerial bourgeois politics.
I don't think it is. This is a place where I have a deep disagreement because When you're a revolutionary, you have to adjust your approach to where you're at. And this is something that, I saw Bernie in many cities in Iowa and Wisconsin and Illinois. And one thing that was special was he got there, and always it was like the first maybe 15 to 20 minutes of a discussion. He would focus on like the immediate stuff affecting that community. He would adjust the general discourse to that immediate thing and then participate in the broader discourse. And that was a way to link up directly with the immediate things that the people in this place are dealing with. Something very similar has to be done in a general revolutionary process. You have to be able to adapt yourself to the common sense worldviews, to the spontaneous philosophies, to use Gramsci's jargon, that people have, and you have to be capable of finding, again, I always go back to this. You have to be capable of finding the rational kernels that different common sense worldviews that different parts of the population have. Find the rational kernels that you can then get and re-articulate towards where you want them to go. That means that you can't not have a one-shoe-fits-all approach. You cannot have a copy-paste approach. If you're giving a speech in New York, you can't use the same, you can't approach it the same way as you do if you're giving a speech in Iowa, or if you're giving a speech in California, or in Florida, or in Georgia, or Mississippi. You have to adjust yourself because you want the best opportunity to bring this person along, and the person you're bringing along starts off at different starting points. So you have to adjust your discourse. You have to be flexible. That's not when you do that, you're not breaking principle. You're not being disingenuous or something. You're being what a revolutionary should be, which is someone flexible enough to bring people from different walks of life, different ideological positions, different spontaneous common sense philosophies, bringing them in regardless of where they're starting from, and approaching things in a way that's not just this lazy one size fits all. I'm going to repeat the same speech and the same talking points and use the same language all over the place.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have much else to add.
I reject it.
So I heard you say one time that someone asked you.
He gets here into the discussion as pertains to Trump, Cop City, and how they're indicting Trump under a similar law that they're indicting the activists fighting against Cop City. Is this something you want to get into, or do you want to switch to? Because this is another place where Jimmy gets a little bit heated, because Cornel doesn't seem to be seeing how it is that this is in many ways a form of a political persecution against Trump, and but it is a little long. It's like about half of the video, and I feel like the discussion could have been had maybe a lot shorter. Jimmy read a whole article, so do you want to give this part of the video a watch?
It's up to you. I'm not super well versed in the legality of how the Democrats are going after Trump. So I don't know if I'd have anything to add there if it's a debate about the nitty gritty of what's going on, but you've seen it. So let me know. Is it worth it? Should we watch part of it, or should we skip through Jimmy reading the entire article?
Yeah. I think that would be good.
What's the article about? Just so maybe give us a short summary.
So the article is talking about how it is that the activists against Cop City, how it is that they're being charged legally, and it also mentions that it is the same thing that they're using to charge Trump in Georgia, I believe. And the point that Jimmy wants to bring up by referencing and reading this article from the Daily Beast, I think, is that they're going to target anyone who presents himself maybe in an authentic or not fashion as an enemy of the establishment. They're going to attack them and use every means possible to sink them. They're doing that with the activists in Cop City. And Jimmy's point is that they're doing that with Trump as well. And Cornel is going to have some disagreements there, but Let's hear from Jimmy.
What they'll do to Bernie Sanders? Participate. Make no mistake, this indictment is not about enforcing the law. It's a desperate overreach and an attempt to discredit legitimate political opposition, and it won't work. That's exactly what they're doing to Donald Trump. That's exactly what they'll do to you. That's exactly what they'll do to Bernie Sanders. That's exactly what they'll do to me. They'll do to anybody who is a threat to the establishment. And
Let
so,
me get a word in. Let me get a word
so
in.
I'm going to let you. So I just want you to. So
Absolutely.
Go ahead. Take it where you will.
I'm very glad that you're zeroing in on the struggle to shut down Cop City. I'm in deep solidarity with them. We're working together in the coming weeks, virtually and so forth. But there's a logical fallacy, a rational gap in your attempt to compare freedom fighters against a vicious system in the name of everyday folk in ghettos, in hoods, and working class communities against the police versus Trump. Trump, I'm not in solidarity with Trump. I want him to have a fair trial. I'm not in solidarity with Trump simply because they use the same law against courageous, visionary freedom fighters against police brutality and police murder versus the same law against a gangster like Trump. Doesn't put Trump on a spectrum with freedom fighters, brother, at all. It doesn't put him on the spectrum at all. That's the fundamental difference between you and I in this case. But I'm glad you're talking about shutting down Cop City.
Is he? I'm pretty sure Jimmy's saying that that's an example of the Biden government acting fascistically, isn't it, though? Which, I mean, is a good point. And I mean, does it matter that Trump is a gangster? I guess it does. Like, we have more solidarity, obviously, with the Cop City protesters than we would with Trump. But, I mean, like, if you listen to Latin American socialists around the world and Latin American leaders talk about what the justice system is doing right now to Trump, they see it as an obvious, attempt at lawfare. And it is a different thing, right? In the case of Cop City, they're trying to shut down the protests, shut down the activists, and shut them up so they can build Cop City. But in the case of Trump, they're trying to knock him out of the 2024 election. So I think both of these things do make Jimmy's point pretty well that the Biden administration is acting fascistically. Even though, but I don't know if he's saying that we should equate Trump with these activists. I think he's just making the point that we have an authoritarian government that's acting on behalf of capital to suppress the masses. Oftentimes, utilizing the legal system. And yeah, I don't know. Do you have a different take?
No, I have the same take, and I think they keep doing this thing to each other where they're saying that because you said this, your argument's connected to this other thing that we both disagree with. And that's not true. Jimmy was not in any way, shape, or form trying to put the activists, a lot of them which are socialists, against Cop City on the same foothold as Trump. Like, he premised the reading of the article on the basis of him not liking Trump and criticizing a lot of what Trump does, but being objective in his seeing that the state is persecuting him and using lawfare against him for whatever reason, which we've talked about on the show. It's the best thing they could be doing for Trump, because his whole thing, what his base likes about him the most, which is the rational kernel we could use, is that he posits himself as anti-status quo and anti-deep state. We know that he's not, in actuality, at least in those 4 years, what he showed us was that he wasn't, and insofar as he's, not willing to bring down capitalist imperialism, he's not actually against the existing order. And that was the easiest thing that we could have done to bring Trump people in. Like, yeah, you like him because he says he's anti-establishment, he's going to drain the swamp. Here's how he didn't, and here's what we need in order to actually do that. Here's Marxism, blah, 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 right? The fact that they're persecuting him now as hard as they are, as hard as they are to prevent him to run, all that is going to do is legitimize his discourse of him being something that he's not, which is anti-establishment. He's not actually anti-establishment. But now those Trump people who we would have otherwise been able to more easily bring to our side, they can just say, well, none of your guys are getting fucking arrested, but my guy is. And you're telling me that the deep state is really more scared of you than him? Why aren't they arresting you, and why are they persecuting him like that? So the liberals are not stupid. They're not stupid. They know that Trump is not actually a threat to the existing order, but they need to keep up this spectacle that he is. And this has been, it has served him on a golden platter the ability to endlessly talk about how anti-deep state and anti-establishment he is at a time when the American people overwhelmingly, liberals, conservatives, independents, are against the way things are and are looking for something different. And the one fucking guy that mainstream media doesn't stop talking about, that posits himself as being anti-establishment but is not in actuality, they're just giving him the best tool to continue that narrative, which is in substance not true, but they're making it appear as such in a very, very confusing way. It's going to be very hard for us to get Trump people now that it's like their fucking guys getting persecuted. They're using lawfare against them.
True.
Because we know it's planned to be in a number of other cities as well. When I'm in Mississippi, it was a goon squad. The goon squad is shot through cities across the country. We saw it in Memphis, it's in Atlanta, it's in Chicago. But the idea of you recognizing that the same weaponization against these courageous freedom fighters is somehow on a spectrum with Trump, I radically reject that. I want a fair trial, but I think he's probably done a number of things that warrants a serious fair trial with him going to jail, but we shall see.
So you're for prosecuting the last president after he loses an election. You think that's a good way to run?
Every president deserves to be rotting in a fucking jail.
If the Nuremberg laws were upheld, every single post-World War II American president would have been hanged. Noam Chomsky, and it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And they even said that after Nuremberg. I just got done reading Chomsky's book, actually, or I'm reading Chomsky's book, so I have this fresh in my mind. But I can't remember who it was, but one of the people leading up the Nuremberg trials, he's like, if we don't stay consistent with these and take these seriously and apply them to Western leaders, then eventually, things are going to devolve into the same type of thing that was going on in Nazi Germany, which, is what's happened. We've not applied the Nuremberg laws to American presidents, and if we did, they'd literally all be in the Hague. They'd be hung.
Absolutely.
Run a democracy? Because again, you don't see the connection that this is the donor class criminalizing anybody who they don't like, and they'll do it to you, and they'll do it to Bernie, and they'll do it to anybody else. And so you don't have to like Donald Trump. I don't at all, but I see what the game is being played here, and you don't see that game being played. You don't see this game really.
I see the game, the same law against the Proud Boys. I wanted a fair trial. I wanted to make sure they're treated, but at the same time,
they're doing
the
to
fact
the
that they are being weaponized. But I think your support of Trump is deeper than you acknowledge. You keep saying, I don't like Trump. I don't like Trump. How can you compare Trump with freedom fighters against police?
I'm not comparing. I'm not comparing that. I'm saying
yes,
that
you are.
I'm saying no. I'm not saying. I'm not.
Of course, they're going to use it against anybody who.
It's the government. Okay. That's amazing that you don't see this. It is unbelievable that you don't see this. This is such a loser for you.
There's opportunity to show the deep differences. Very deep differences, though. But you do what you got to do, and I'm doing what I got to do, and I learn from you, and I hope you can learn a little bit from me. But we shall see.
The biggest story of my lifetime, if it wasn't Russiagate, which led direct.
I think that might have been Cornel's worst moment in this interview. I know he's heated by this point. I think he's emotional a little bit, and there's a lot of tension. But I don't think that's the point Jimmy's making, that the freedom fighters and these activists against Cop City are the same as Trump. He's making the point that the Biden administration is using lawfare to try and knock Trump out of the election, the same kind of lawfare they're using against these activists, which is an example of the Democratic Party being every bit as fascistic as Trump. I don't think he's saying Trump is the same as, Black freedom fighters or people fighting against Cop City. And, it's a bit of a straw man of Jimmy's argument to say that, but it's, as you said earlier, Carlos, and when you're in these live conversations and you're being viewed by a million people, it's difficult, and especially when it's live and you're going back and forth. Like maybe if Cornel West could reflect on this, he would change his tone a little bit. But
yeah, and that seems to be the general spirit of the interview. Two people who agree so much on so much, who instead of utilizing that to advance a campaign that they both agree on, and then finding a place to speak about those disagreements. They showed in many ways the worst parts of themselves in this interview, and I'm not condemning Jimmy or Cornel. I still think he's the best candidate that we have, and an important individual in this historical process of a class struggle that's unfolding in a very exciting way in our country. But um, I hope that they can improve, because they're both of them have, I think, some deep flaws, but generally a lot of the substance of their work is very good. But like stuff like this is just creating divisions, and I'm looking at people in the comments, and everyone's fighting with each other, and it's West Dore 2024. It's the only rational solution to this.
I love it. That's what we need. No, for sure. And I mean, I wish Jimmy would have titled this something different, or I don't know. When I go into these discussions, the main thing I try not to do is lose my cool. And I mean, if I can sit there and talk to Vaush for an hour and 45 minutes and not get emotional, I think other people can do it too. But yeah,
and
hopefully
you're not
they'll both
trained,
learn from this and improve.
right? And you're not you're not. Jimmy does this all the fucking time. You're not trained, and you just went in there and just like didn't explode or anything. Noah, he had his first ever debate with a fucking reactionary anti-China propagandist, and he was really really good. But it's those it's when people are the closest to home that it's where things get the most emotional.